Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is daughter of Abel. The bride Hawkins and I would like to start finding seats for Sabbath services. It's now time to find your seat for Sabbath services.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is daughter of Yahchanan, Hawks, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priestess starting very soon. It is a privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters now entering the sanctuary. I'd like to turn it over to the great priest of the House of Yahweh.
Okay, we are going to have a short little review this morning before I get into my subject. Now, you remember the numbers, the gematria numbers that I have done in the past, the one that always keeps coming up. Does anybody remember that number? The 1909, the one that reverts back to the measure the temple, the fulfillment of that prophecy in 1989. Well, I had brought out that the Strong's Concordance Red Letter Edition definition for 1909 was superimposition, which actually related directly to the prophecy of measure the temple. When they came out with the Strong's edition, that definition was removed. But what was added, I want to show you, they have a list of all of the numbers. And I want you to take notice of the number that I have highlighted here. These are all the numbers that are associated with the 1909. Now, in my gematria studies, I've also shown that Yahweh's protection is also under 1909. Now, if you see the number 1994 is circled in red and highlighted, we are going to be focusing on that date today. Now, when the Strongs redid their book, they redid the definitions. And the definition that they added for the 1909, if you notice what's red and highlighted, in the days of. And in the days of, do you remember which scripture that reverts to? Revelations 10:7. But in the days of the voice of the malak, the seventh malak, when he will begin to sound, the great secret of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants, the prophets. Now, I did a gematria on, but in the days of the voice of the seventh malak. And you can notice all of the numbers that I have highlighted and that I have underlined. And the one that really stood out is 3074, which comes from 3022. 3022 means light or white stone. Revelations 2:17. And Revelations 2:17 actually deals with the white stone of acquittal. And the overseer, in the 10th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 13, verse 35. But you're given the authority or the badge showing, or the white stone as it would, the acquittal showing you're innocent. You can be trusted with people's possessions. So when you think of the word acquittal, you relate yourself to a trial. And when the person is found innocent, he is acquitted of that crime. So that means that he is no longer considered to be guilty. So when I was doing our next study, it's our job was revealed, and it's opposing Babylon. And opposing Babylon is we are to expose the 666. And we know what number 666 reverts to, don't we? That's the number that reverts to Satan. And in Revelations 11:3, it says, but I will give to my 2 witnesses to perform their prophetic offices, and they will foretell events about the 3.5 years, those cast about in darkness. Now, we're to expose what? What are we to expose? We are to expose the secrets. And as in Revelations 10:7 says, but in the days of the voice of the 7th malak, when he speaks, he will reveal the secret. In Passover of 1994, the overseer, I'll read it directly from the Unveiling Satan book. It's on page 5. It's in the, under the heading War in Heaven and Persecution in the House, in Yahweh's House. The contents of our book on this subject, the subject of unveiling Satan, her true identity revealed. The subject, I lost page 5. Okay, what he is saying is, he began writing this book after Yahweh's Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread in 1994. Does anybody remember what else took place in 1994 while this was going on? This was when the overseer's wife divorced him and took him to court. And it was a whole big trying to persecute the overseer and to shame him and to shame the house of Yahweh and everything else. But it didn't work. Also in 1994, does anybody remember what took place in the 7th month of 1994? That was when Jupiter got hit. It started on 7/16/1994 and lasted for 6 days. And on 7/23/1994, Satan was kicked out and thrown out of heaven. All at the same time that Unveiling Satan was being actually written. Now, I did a gematria on Unveiling Satan. And Unveiling Satan, we have here, it's 1262. To select, Yahweh has selected his 2 witnesses in these last days. And from the English, it's 1008, which means, in the book it says house of God, but we know it means house of Yahweh. And in the simple, it means tent, covering, tabernacle. Okay? Now, in these last days, there are 2 people that are actually working to bring forth the finishing of Yahweh's house. This was revealed, this was sent to me. Hopefully it'll fit. Okay. It says Yahweh. On the right side of Yahweh is Yeshua. Yeshua and his donkeys are the foundation of this plan. On the left side of Yahweh, where Yahweh takes his right hand, Israel and his donkeys are the finishing of this plan. And all of this is under the protection of Yahweh as shown in the Gematria and the Strong's 1909, which takes us back to the prophecy of measure the temple. And with that, I give it back to the next speaker.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. Yahweh's peace be with you. So I'm also going to be speaking about the Unveiling Satan book, Her True Identity Revealed. So I had this question. I was trying to center the speech around a question. And the question that I made up was, how does the Gematria prove Yahweh's work, that Yahweh works through Yisrael? How does the Gematria prove Yahweh works through Yisrael Hawkins? So, now the book of Yahweh, we all know, is the only source of all knowledge, right? And this is by which the 7th malak is given the spirit and understanding to testify of the things that are written therein. So with the knowledge, through thorough study and tireless hours, Overseer has put out publications to expound on particular topics for our studies and understanding as well, which is quite amazing. I mean, he put out so many publications. And so this is the front cover, Unveiling Satan, Who True Identity Revealed. Now, this is the very first chapter, and it's the war in heaven, salvation has come. So this is what Overseer begins the book, Unveiling Satan, on. Now, I remember the second feast that I was here, this is the book that I purchased. And as soon as I got it, I could not put this book down because everything I was taught was proven as a lie in this book. And it solidified the fact that what was written in the scriptures, the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So it really solidified this fact in my mind because everything I've ever been taught was proven as a lie. So this brings me to my first point. When Overseer testifies of the prophecy of the war in heaven. So if you would all please turn with me to Revelations 12:7. And I'm going to read 7 through 9. And there was war in heaven. Micahyah and her malachim fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought with her angels, but did not prevail, nor was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and Satan, who deceives the whole world. She was cast out into the earth, and her angels were cast out with her. So 3 things I want to stand out is 1, the war in heaven. 2, in verse 8, it says, nor was their place, so their place. And 3, cast out. So if you could please play the clip, and I'll show you what occurred on during the war in heaven.
Astronomers have witnessed 5 massive explosions on the planet Jupiter as fragments from the shoemaker Levi collided with the planet. Larger explosions are expected later this week.
They called it the biggest explosion in the solar system for hundreds of years. Half an hour after the first comet fragment went in, the impact was still visible. The cloud of debris spread out for thousands of miles and was over 1,000 miles high. The astronomers were jubilant.
We're going to see things and we're going to learn a lot. That's the good news tonight.
Yeah, there we go. Absolutely incredible. So that was the war in heaven that took place, and all the scientists were just ecstatic about it because they had never seen anything like this occur in their lifetime, nor like hundreds and hundreds of years prior. So it was a really amazing thing that this occurred, and Yahweh prophesied that it would occur in this time period. So going back to their place. Now, I looked up the place and the Strong's, and it means location as a position, a home, tract. And then in the Brown, Drives, and Briggs, we have opportunity, power, occasion, underline that word, occasion, for acting. So again, nor was their place, their power found any more in heaven. Now, on the second page of the Unveiling Satan, Overseer has a subtitle, This War is No Freak Accident. I share this book amongst my family, so there's a lot of writings in it. Now, I had to put the subtitle, This War is No Freak Accident, and you're going to be astonished by the things that came out in the Gematria. So all these numbers are in the Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, and for the first one, we have 255, and it means a howler or lonesome wild animal, a doleful creature, and it's an expression of grief or surprise. Oh, now get this. This 1530 is something rolled, heap of stone, plural. It means ruins. So given in the clip, you see those heaps of stone, 21 fragments plummeting into Jupiter. I find that really amazing that it was in the subtitle. So in the next number was 1644, and it means to drive out from a possession. Divorce, to cast out, to drive out. Isn't that amazing? I think so too. That's absolutely amazing. And again, going back to my question, how does the Gematria prove Yahweh works through Yisrael Hawkins? He's completely inspired when he's writing his publications. I mean, Yahweh works with Overseer Yisrael Hawkins, and I find it truly amazing that the Gematria is backing that up. And with this, if you would all please stand, may Yahweh bless your Sabbath, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Shalom, please be seated. Okay, technology has not come through, but listen, see these numbers? It might be hard to see, but these are numbers for life. 1-800-613-9494, 325-672-5420, 325-893-5899. These are all numbers to the House of Yahweh where you will get instructions in life. So if you didn't get those phone numbers, I'll say them again later. But it's vital that you call. It's vital that you receive, oh, there we go, that you receive the knowledge of life and salvation. Don't think it's an odd thing that 4,199 religions, out of all those, there is only one, the House of Yahweh, in these last days to bring back the perfect laws and to offer salvation once again. Micahyah 3 verse 6 says, I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. Back in Moshe's time, the two witnesses were Moshe and Aaron. At the time of Yeshua, it was Yeshua and Yahchanan the immerser. In these last days, foretold of by the prophets of old, it is Israel and Jacob, the two witnesses. Psalm 19 verse 4 says, Yahweh says, I have set up a house for a light. Not 4,199 false religions, but a house, the great house of Yahweh. Now, this past week, I was getting ready for class, and we're going over this prophetic word, the 2019 prophetic word. So the assignment was given to us to read certain pages. So on page 13, the heading says, 4,199 religions getting ready for war. One religion getting ready to bring peace. So I thought in my mind, I know what I'm going to see in this article. I'm going to see articles on war preparation by the nations. I'm going to see statistics on military spending, and I'm going to see scripturally how the nations are angry. As I started to read, my thoughts were like way off. I was so amazed. No one is inspired the way the overseer is inspired to teach us the things that we need to learn. Yes, only he knows how to do that. He started off in Genesis 1:26, stating the fact that Yahweh was going to make mankind in his image. That in Yahchanan 1:1 that he had a plan, and that plan was from the beginning. So as I turned over to page 14 in this here, the overseer has written down here Leviticus 18:5-30. I'm not going to read that to you. The sins that are committed because of not following these laws have brought mankind down. On your own time, take time to see what the rejection of Yahweh's laws has brought. So on page 16, he says, notice, defilement causes confusion. Breaking the laws is called evil, wickedness, and sin. This is a paragraph that really caught my mind. He said, when the choice is made to do evil, breaking one or more of Yahweh's laws, you cause sickness, you cause death to any one of the 10,000 micro kingdoms that cause your eyes to see, thereby bringing blindness to the whole body. Only the overseer can write like this. Only he can plant this in our minds. It says on here, none of the 4,199 religions practice Yahweh's laws, so they're filled with confusion, bickering, force, and war. You see what he did? The overseer showed us the cause that would bring the wars by these 4,199 religions. He put in here Isaiah 59, where we know that Yahweh's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, nor his ear heavy that he will not hear. But our own iniquities, our own sins have separated us from Father Yahweh, so that he will not hear, that he will not listen. We just have to repent and convert. Now, verse 3 is what really connected me to really see that it's mankind who is destroying mankind, individuals destroying themselves. And I've read these verses millions of times before, but not until the overseer clearly lays it out like this. He says, for your hands are defiled with blood. He was talking to me. I lived in sin before Yahweh called me out. And it took me right back to that paragraph where it says, when I broke one of Yahweh's laws, I caused a micro kingdom to die. That's not what Yahweh wants. He wants us to be in unity and keep his laws. Consider the effect that the sins of our forefathers have had on the curses in our minds and in our bodies that were created by their sins. And then I want you to ask yourself, are you willing to reject the laws of Yahweh, to continue in this pattern of sin, to cause the generations to get weaker and weaker? Are you willing to do this? I'm not saying it's your fault. There was a deceptive system that was set up in the Garden of Eden, the Catholic Church. The tree of the knowledge of righteousness and evil that caused this deception of rejecting Yahweh's laws. Now in Samuel's time, it was called the elders of Israel. Micahyah talked about them as the heads of Jacob. And in Yeshua's time, it was the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians. Today it is the great whore that sits on 7 hills, the Catholic Church. The same system that started it in the Garden of Eden, that tree of mixture of righteousness and evil. So it is not your fault you're deceived, but it's your choice now. It has been laid before you, life by righteousness and keeping Yahweh's laws, or death by rejecting them. Blessed, Revelation 22 verse 14 says, blessed is he who keeps my laws, Yahweh's laws, that they will have right to the tree of life. Let us stand, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker.
Shalom, great family of Yahweh, please be seated. I need to jump right into this, and then I'm going to be speeding along, so hold on. This year, 2019, our great overseer will be 85 years old. Now, 2019 in the Hebrew means very perverse, and if you look at the world around us, it is very perverse. They are turned away from what is right. But that word 2019 comes from 2015 and means to turn about, return, be converted, turn back. I want you to remember those definitions. And then 85 in the Hebrew means father of a multitude, which, by the way, is my title. Now, are we not considered the children of Israel? Have we not been begotten or fathered by our great overseer through the teaching of the message? Isaiah 44:3 says that we are his seed, but not just those of us who are sitting here. There is a multitude. Yeremyah 23:3, and if you want to turn there, page 591. But I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries and bring them back. Remember 2015, return, turn back. And this is done through the preaching and the publishing. Now on fourth day, I got some stats from the great Judge Rebecca in relation to the number of people that are being reached via the internet. We started advertising through Google on 6/2/2010. And as of that date, 5/22/19, we had reached 32,311,973 people. But we've reached so many more, she said. But we didn't have stats for that because Yahweh.com actually started 12/19/1996, 23 years ago. And then Facebook ads started 10/13/2010. And thus far, we have reached 184,875,770 people. And then the press releases began 10/30/2013 on multiple platforms. Now let's look at some of these dates, and you are going to see the hand of Yahweh in this. We're going to start with Google. 6/2/2010. Drop the zeros, and you've got 62:21, and that is from 62:13 and 4:10. We know 4:10 means strength. I'm only going to cover a couple of these definitions here. Bring forth, as in bring forth the message. Gather, as in gather the remnant. Fulfill, as in fulfill prophecy. Yes, prophecy is being fulfilled. The remnant is being gathered through the message of our great teacher, of Abba Yisrael. Let's look at 12:19. 12:19 also means gather. And then let's look at 1996. To gather together. Gathering together of the elect. Gathering together of a crowd, of a multitude. And then we're going to look at 10:13. Drop the zero again. And we've got Adon. And we find here that Yahweh sets forth his essential and unswerving principles of mercy and judgment, and presents him as Father, a friend, and a moral governor. We have learned this through the great overseer, through his teachings. Let's look at 2010. Release. In the Hebrew, it means release. In the Greek, it means give liberty. To release or give liberty from the bondage of sin. Then look at 10:30. 10:30 is from 10:53, which is from 10:04, which is Beit or house. And 81:21, which is to be brilliant, westward. This house in the west that gives light, a light that's set on a hill, a lighthouse that helps to navigate those in the dark. And then in the 9th book of Israel, part 1, chapter 20, the great overseer in verse 70 was reading Isaiah 2:2. About the house of Yahweh being established, and he says, all nations will eventually flow to it. He says, get that. All nations are eventually going to come here. All nations. And then in verse 71, he says, they will come over to you, another prophecy says. Over what? Over a stone? A puddle? That's got to be the seas. The nations overseas are going to be coming over here. Isaiah 2:3, and many people, a multitude, will come and say, let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh. And he, Yisrael Hawkins, who has fathered us, will teach us of Yahweh's ways. Revelation 11:7-9. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude of all nations standing before the throne. Now, the great overseer says this isn't going to take place until after the burning prophesied of in Micahyah 4:1. The day comes that will burn like an oven. But I want to assure you that there is protection, because he said, in order for people to come from overseas to here, there must be protection. And how do we get that protection? Who gets that protection? Look at verse 2. For you who reverence Yahweh's name. And how do we reverence Yahweh's name? Look at verse 4. Remember the laws. We reverence Yahweh's name by keeping his laws with the statutes and the judgments. That word remember in Micahyah 4 is 21:42 zakar, and it means to mark, so as to be recognized. Therefore, keeping Yahweh's laws marks us. We are recognized as belonging to him. And those of us who have that mark or that seal, we can expect protection. Trust Yahweh. Believe Yahweh. Isaiah 45:1. This is what Yahweh says to his anointed Israel, my righteous shepherd, whom I have taken by his right hand, to teach my message to the nations before him. Remember, Mattithyah 24:14. This message will be preached to all nations by Yisrael Hawkins. Isaiah 45:14. This is what Yahweh says. Men of stature will come over to you. They will be yours. Yes, this multitude that he has fathered. They will come over. They will come after you. In chains they will come over. And they will fall down to you. And they will make supplication to you, saying, surely Yahweh is in you. Yes, they, like us, will be saying, blessed is he, Yisrael Hawkins, the father of a great multitude, who comes in the name of Yahweh. Please stand for our next teacher.
Please be seated. Wasn't that a great program we had today? So I wanted to just end with one quick gematria that I put in, and it was, in this generation, who is in unity with Yahweh? Just ask that question. 3 numbers came up. 503, 4787, and 3018. And in Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, 503 is a denominative, and it's from 505, and it says, to make 1,000-fold. Now, do you see what our last speaker just brought out? To make 1,000-fold, to bring forth thousands. And in Facebook views and in Google ratings, we are up there. Are they all here right now? No. But they will be coming over to us here at Yahweh's Great House. The next number was 4787, and in the Hebrew, it means trouble, bitterness. And that brought me to Mattithyah 24:14 and 21. Mattithyah 24:14 and 21, where it says, and this joyous message of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world from the house of Yahweh at Abel by the witness Yisrael. For Yahweh will be with him. He will preach this message to all nations. That's that thousands, right? And then the end will come. Daniyl 12:1. At that time, which means in this generation, one who is like Yahweh, which is who? That's right. Will stand up at Abel. So that tells us who and where and what are they going to be doing? Who stands at Abel to teach Yahweh's just perfect laws to the children of your people. And there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation to that time. And that talks about that time of trouble in that second gematria. Also Mattithyah 24:21. For then will be great tribulation, such has not come to pass since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever will be. So we have the who is our pastor Israel Hawkins and the great house of Yahweh. And what's going on at that time period? A time of trouble and great bitterness. What are we doing? That last number, Hebrew number 3018. It means toil, hence a work, produce, property as result of labor or work. And that brings to mind Revelation 7, verse 9, where it says, and this, after this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no man could number. No man could number this multitude. Of all nations, which reminds me of the nations, we just read about that, bringing out of the nations, peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes. and they will have palm branches in their hands, which means they'll be taught by the witness Israel and this house to keep Yahweh's great feasts. Being a part of the House of Yahweh in this time period is one of the most exciting things that you could possibly do in your whole life. Okay? Don't grow weary of doing righteousness, because the fruits of your labor, and there are thousands of them, they are getting ready after these bombs drop and after we get all things cleaned up to come over to you. So we'll turn it over to the great priest in the House of Yahweh.
Great Deacon Michael also. Shabbat Shalom, great saints of Yahweh. Please be seated. I pray Yahweh's peace is with each and every one of us, all of us. We're going to have to move real quick. For your notes, you can turn over to Revelation 11:4. Revelation 11:4. And I'll go ahead and start reading. These are the two olive trees, and the two lamps of the seven lampstand, ministering for the Father in the earth. Now write that down for your notes. Turn over to Zecharyah 4:11, which is interesting. 11:4 and then 4:11. Zecharyah 4:11. I have a lot to cover. The codes is just like bringing out so much stuff. I don't know if I can get to all of it, but we're going to try. Zecharyah 4:11, and it reads, Then I answered and said to him, What are these two olive trees upon the right side of the lampstand and upon the left side of it? Okay, so I did a search based on one of Pastor's last sermons, and this search is called the two olive trees. Now you remember, there's two branches, two olive trees. The witness Jacob, he was a branch of the House of Yahweh. He had a branch too. He wasn't the chosen branch, but he was a branch. And I had the blessing of talking to Pastor Israel about it a little bit, and he had said, because I asked him more about it, he said that when they got older and moved out, his older brother Jacob, who was 10 years older, guided him. And there was no more of the home teaching from his mother, so they're out on their own. And Pastor said when he was young and he was learning and he would start to go off a little bit, it was the witness Jacob that steered him back, and Yahweh used him to keep Pastor Israel's training going till it was time for him to take the reins and begin his work. And he said he would go by his home, and he would say some things, and he said his brother say, no, Bill, you got to remember this scripture and this prophecy. And he helped him and guided him and was his trainer and was his teacher and was faithful to helping Pastor up until the time of his death. So let's get into this two olive trees, and then I've got another one that I want to cover a little bit, which is based on the deal of the century. But this one is two olive trees, and we're going to start. Let's see. There you go. Pull out my fancy pointer here. Okay, so right here in the very middle, I don't know why I'm looking at it. Right here in the very middle is deal of century. Deal of century. Okay. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm backwards here. This is two olive trees, all right? And then we have over here, we have is lampstand, two olive trees, and they stand on both sides of the lampstand. All right. 2 is witnesses, this long one right here, witnesses. Then we have Jacob. Jacob is right here. And we have Yisrael right there. One right there. Okay, then we have, let's see where we're at. This is Revelation 11:4. Revelation 11:4 is right here. Then over here, we have Zecharyah 4:11. Zecharyah 4:11. And above the two olive trees, we have our high priest Yahshua. Now this next one was interesting, and I'm going to come back to it in a moment. It's right here, and it said, for Yahweh. And I didn't know what that meant. I was like, for Yahweh, what does that mean? And I kind of just, okay, I put it down, for Yahweh. And they stand for Yahweh. Then we come back over here, and we have priests, which they are anointed by Yahweh, priests anointed by Yahweh. Right there. Okay, then of course we have Debar Yahweh, laws of Yahweh. Right here, laws of Yahweh. Then we have golden oil, which the witnesses are bringing, and the last day's witness is bringing us the golden oil. And then we have anointed by Yahweh brothers. Okay? So we have anointed by Yahweh brothers. Now, going back to for Yahweh, I went back to that later and I was thinking, okay, so what is for Yahweh? For Yahweh. So I looked and I did a deep search, and then this one came up, like I said, stands for Yahweh. So it just wasn't in the original search, the first search. So stands for Yahweh. So that's the two olive trees, and now we have the one spokesman in these last days, Yisrael Hawkins, who is bringing us these things and preparing us for Yahweh's great kingdom. Now, I'm just going to give you a little taste of this. This is something I've been working on. And I did a search for Deal of the Century, which we know is Trump's plan for peace. And there was so much stuff come up that I had to do a complete page. Then I had to wipe it clean and do more. And there's still more, and there's so much to come. But I'm going to give you page 2, because page 2 has a lot of great stuff in it, but they both do. So let's go to page 2. And these are called my charts. This is how I chart everything from the program, so I know how to, see, it's kind of like chicken scratch, and then I know how to mark it on the program. Okay, so this is actually page 2 of Deal of the Century. And remember, Deal of the Century was orchestrated for Trump by Jason Kushner and Jason Greenblatt and David Friedman. All right? So what we have here... Okay, so here's Deal of the Century right in the middle. Deal of Century, like a cross. Deal right in the middle of Century. Okay, and then we have Tyrant. Tyrant was there, or Tyrannus. And you remember the sermons that Pastor brought on the word tyrant and the school of Tyrannus. Then we have Domination. Domination. Down here we have Jerusalem, which is one of the big controversies of this peace plan, the who's going to get Jerusalem, so to speak. Now this one came up, and they were stacked right on top of each other. Melt, fervent, heat. Melt, fervent, heat. And then over here, connected to Deal of the Century, is peace plan. Okay, this says peace here, plan. Connecting Deal of the Century to peace plan is the word useless. And now Yahweh, it extended from the beginning of Deal of the Century to the beginning of peace plan, and it was useless. Then right here we have no waiver. And we know that the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, made an announcement saying, we are pleased to announce there will be no more signing of the waiver, and that the ambassador was now, his official residence was at the embassy in Jerusalem. Okay, so let's go back to the code. Then over here, right here, is Oslo. Oslo, and we know that was where the peace plan had originated, the Oslo Accord. So we got Oslo there. Then coming off the bottom of Deal of the Century is Yada. Yada. Now the interesting thing is the skip for Deal of the Century was 57,900 characters from one letter to the next. So, of course, I took 1 0 off, right, because we drop the 0 sometimes. And it came up to 5790, which comes from 5789, and it means to hasten, gather, assemble themselves, to accelerate a work. And that's exactly what they're doing. Their Deal of the Century. And you remember Daniyl 9:27 and the other scriptures and the prophecy of, and through peace they will destroy many. And through peace they will destroy many, because they're going to try to force their peace plan upon the people. And just some of the things that came up in the Deal of the Century, just to let you know, is, of course, there was Babylonians in it, Yisrael, war, rebellious Lilith. Rebellious Lilith came up, nuclear baby, and birth. So we're seeing major birth pains take place right now with what's going on with Iran. So watch the news. Pay attention to the news that's coming out, and pay close attention to the sermons that are coming out, because our salvation depends upon it now. And with that, if you'll all please stand. I have the great opportunity to turn it over to a great priest in the House of Yahweh, the great Kohan Shaul Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom. Please be seated, brothers and sisters. We got quite a bit to cover today. We're going to continue along this same line here of this 7-year plan, and go back and look at some more history here during this 7-year plan, and see that everything in the fulfilling and the finishing up of Yahweh's plan, as Daniyl showed, all ties in and relies on this 7-year agreement that was signed with Rabin, as the prophecy showed. So if you notice in Mattithyah 24, in verse 3, he's talking about the end there. Mattithyah 24:3, what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the ages here. And then in verse 7 and 8, we see the situations that have arisen. Remember, because this is a time of trouble such as never was. Now, we're not at the worst yet, but the worst is coming. And we see the wars, famines, which is the food shortages, the problems with the food, the unedible food because of mankind's sins, the disease epidemics, and the unnatural or environmental disasters, man-made, created in place after place. In verse 8, we see it said, Yahshua said, these are the first half of the sorrows. Tribulation is sorrow. First half of the tribulation is what he's talking about here. And go back to Daniyl 9, because this is a plan that involves all nations here. This 7-year plan of actions of the nations. In Daniyl 9, and we see, and he will confirm a covenant with many, that is Rabin, but it's also every nation on the face of the earth, as we're going to see. But it started with a certain location and a certain people. For 1 week, that is 7 years. But notice that 7 years, if you jump back up to verse 24, it's talking about a 70 weeks that's determined upon your people, upon your holy city, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make atonement or reconciliation for iniquity. That's what he's talking about here with Genesis 1:26. To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holiest of the holy people. This is the completion of Genesis 1:26. And these are the actions and the time periods that Yahweh gave us so we would know in what time period we're living in. All right? And everything is, we've seen in the prophecies, and then so far today, everything is lining up just the way Yahweh prophesied it. Now, the nations are still fighting bitterly over that first half of this 7-year plan of actions. This plan is prophesied not for just 7 years alone, but for 7 years of actions. Certain actions agreed upon and confirmed with Rabin. Remember the principles that they signed on the White House lawn under the direction of Clinton, Rabin, and Arafat. Although they weren't the actual signers, don't let that throw you off. Like Yeshua said, not I, but my disciples. Well, their right-hand men signed that agreement, and they were in agreement with it. They were all there. It was done by them with Rabin. Now, we're going to see when the actions halted here, when this 3.5 years actually stopped. And it did stop, but rest assured that President Trump right now has plans to put this last 3.5 years back into action. There's no way any man can stop the 3.5 years from going into action and finishing with the nuclear destruction. Because notice here, back in verse 27, and he will confirm a covenant with Rabin for 1 week, 7 years. In the midst of the week, and that's what we're going to pick up today. In the midst of the week, 1997, he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Instead, he will cause the prevalence of the Queen of Heaven, the Lord of Heaven, even until the destruction that is determined. This is the nuclear wars that are coming. They're prophesied, they're going to come. The second half is going to be as sure as the first half. Sure as those men signed that agreement, and we got it on tape, it was in the news, we watched it live that morning, I remember, at the press room. As sure as that took place, the rest of it is going to take place, brothers and sisters. So we've got to have our minds geared for this. Now, on this 3.5 years here, look at Isaiah 8 and verse 22. We just saw at the end of 27 here, the destruction poured upon the desolator. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind. This nuclear burning, the 1 hour burning. Now look in verse Isaiah 8 and verse 22. Well, first in verse 20, and you got to think about this here because this ties in verse 20. To the laws and to the prophecy. Everything, Yahweh is in control of his prophecies. Everything is going to take place according to that prophecy, no matter what man may try to do on his own. All right? And even when you try to bring about a prophecy, and not that this was intentional, as we'll see, but without that work being prophesied, like Amos 3:7 said, it can't go through. It can't go through. It's not that time yet. It's got to be according to the written prophecies. Because if they speak not according to this word, there's no light in them. Now jump down to 22. Then they will look to the earth, and behold, trouble and darkness, gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness. This is the same thing that Daniyl was just talking about, the destruction that's poured on the desolator. It's the same thing Yeshua was talking about in Mattithyah 24, when these wars will darken the sun and moon. But it all takes place in the context of the 70 years and then the last 7 years of action. They weren't 70 years in a row, or else this plan would have been done long before 1934. Way hundreds of years before 1934 if it was 70 years in a row. Remember, because it was 70 weeks rather, 70 weeks of years, 490 years. It would have been done long ago. But it's certain actions that are prophesied. Because during that time, brothers and sisters, Yahweh is forming and perfecting a people. That's what it's all for. Like we said in the beginning, Genesis 1:26. It's done to create mankind in Yahweh's image, this family, this immediate family of Yahweh that's then going to guide all the other families of the earth. But notice the thick darkness. Thick darkness, turn over to Yael 2:15. And we're told at this time, this is a command given, and we'll see to whom it's given here, blow the shofar, the trumpet, in Zion. Why Zion? Look at Amos 3:2. Amosia 3:2. Why Zion? Why blow it in Zion? Well, Amosia 3 and verse 1, hear this word which Yahweh has spoken against you, O children of Israel, against the whole family which I brought up from the land of Egypt, saying, you only I have known of all the families of the earth. Therefore, he's going to allow them to experience the curses of their sins and iniquities. It started with this family that came out of Egypt, and they were brought to a land that was later named Israel. They didn't know it was Israel when they first went there, but it became later known as Israel. So this nation here, and then Yahweh allowed it to be established again in the last days in 1948, so that these prophecies would be fulfilled. Not because they were the holiest of the holy people, no, far from it. Remember the lessons of Samuel. They said, give us a king. We will not submit to Yahweh ruling over us. We're going to have a king just like all the other nations. But he never finished dealing with them. And remember, they took over the whole earth. The people, they were, remember the promise to Abraham. They took over the whole earth, every nation. Remember that, every nation on earth, all languages, peoples, and tribes. And then this land, which is in and around the great river Euphrates, where mankind was first created, and then as Pastor wrote later, the end of man's governments on earth is going to start in that same land. The end of man's governments. Doesn't mean they're the chosen place, and that's where salvation is going to come first. No, it comes in a land that was not yet established. Okay. Now, in 1997, the House of Yahweh started fulfilling this prophecy in Yael 2:15. During a 7-year period from 1997 to 2003, now this isn't the 7-year agreement here, but this was a 7-year period, Pastor made 7 trips to the land of Israel. Okay, and he didn't go alone, but he went there to witness and to prophesy before the leaders of both the Hebrews and the Arabs, both sides. Okay? Now, on this trip, he was accompanied at various trips by a team. He was accompanied by the entire House of Yahweh, whether you got on the plane with them or not. Everyone in the House of Yahweh doing their jobs at that time is accredited by Yahweh with having a hand in this work, in fulfilling this prophecy. But the ones that went with them was Kohan David, Hiram and Hawkins, Kohan Zephaniah, Hiram and Hawkins, Kohan Hizkiah, Kohan Shaul went, Deacon Keefa Bowler, and Deacon Kenneth Hawkins on various trips with Pastor to Israel. Now, you might be thinking, well, didn't the witness Jacob already go to Israel? Yes, in 1967, shortly after Pastor moved to Abelin, the witness Jacob went to Israel and tried to present the name and the laws of Yahweh to the people. To the people there. He was out on the streets passing out literature. He talked to, some small-time rabbis. Well, the people at that time, they rejected it. They didn't want to change. They were already indoctrinated against the use of Yahweh's name, and they didn't need his written laws. They had the Talmud. And at one point, remember, Pastor told us, they threatened him saying, well, if you don't stop this, we're going to send you home in a box. Remember that? So it simply wasn't that time. Why pastor? Well, first off, turn over to Revelations 11. Revelations 11:5. And the answers are in the books here. But in Revelation 11:5, the part I want you to see is that the every word of Yahweh, remember, to the law and to the prophets, they must speak according to this, but they must act according to it. Jacob's work there, it wasn't the prophesied time yet. All right? Every word of Yahweh, like the two-edged swords of fire, proceeds out of who? The mouth of the spokesman of them. And then it talks about devouring the enemies and committing, those who commit sin will be destroyed. This isn't a science fiction movie. This is the same thing Daniel wrote at the end of 9:27, until the destruction is poured out upon the desolator. Pastor went and told the leaders, and that was the difference. Pastor went before the leaders. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Turn over to Revelations 10. And we see in verse 7, in the days of the seventh malak, in the seventh malak, when he will begin to sound, the great secret would be finished, as he declared to his servants the prophets. Now verse 11, it was given to the seventh malak, the spokesman. You must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, and languages, and kings. The kings, the leaders, the rulers, the ones in power, whether religious, political, or educational. That's who pastor went to speak to, okay? And the media leaders and so on. And it includes the many peoples, nations, and tongues, because every nation has a stake in the land of Israel. Every nation has representatives there. They have people that live there and work there. You'd be amazed. It's kind of like a melting pot. And it should be no surprise to us, because the 12 tribes is where it all started. And the 12 tribes spread to every nation. Now every nation has an investment there in that land. And that's who pastor went to speak to. Now, I'm going to have to skip down through some of this. Now, on the first meeting that we held, now this is, think about September 1993, the signing goes into effect October 1993. Now jump ahead, and we're skipping a lot of other prophecies that were fulfilled, but for this, just jump right ahead to 3rd Roman, or I'll say it for the worldly people listening, March of 1997, pastor went to Israel. I was with him, and so was Kahan David Heimerman at that time on that very first trip. And this is the trip that, remember, 1997. And the first meeting that we held in March of 97, we offered Yahweh's peaceful solution to rebuilding the temple in Israel, as shown by Yahweh's prophet Yechezkiah. On 3/10, I, a pastor, along with Kohan David Heimerman Hawkins and Kohan Shaul Hawkins, held a press conference in Tel Aviv, Israel, at the headquarters of the Israeli Journalist Association, okay? This is where all the journalists go to hang out, I guess, after work. And there was over 50 journalists, television, newspaper, radio. There was some from the United States that were in Israel, their correspondents in Israel at that time. And pastor explained to them for the very first time about the rebuilding of the temple. What we have in the temple brochure. He laid it all out. The other thing that they heard Yahweh's prophecies. They heard Yahweh's laws. Another thing that they heard for the very first time that was shocking to them was the name of Yahweh. No one was using the name of Yahweh. And I'll tell you, every last one of them, to a person, even the people we work with, they would not say Yahweh. The closest anyone would get was Yahweh. Yahweh. Yes, they don't have trouble saying G-O-D, L-O-R-D, Jehovah. That's all great. I don't even think they have trouble saying, they certainly don't have trouble saying Jesus over there, even though they claim not to follow him, but that's who they are following. But Yahweh, no go. You can't get them to say it. They wouldn't even spell it right in the papers, except in our ads. And we had put ads in the paper, in the number one Israeli daily paper, and the people called complaining because guess what? When Yahweh's name is written in something, the religious can't throw it out. So they could not destroy that newspaper. Pretty amazing how Yahweh handled all that, huh? Anyways, I'm going to let the reporter's words describe the meeting because I think it's really great. Here, what kind of time do I have? How much time? How much? Wow. All right. Well, I took up too much time here. But anyway, in a newspaper called Yediot Aharonot, which in Hebrew it means the latest news, okay? So this was the latest news on March 11, 1997. And the headline is, I registered a patent on the temple. Yesterday, while the Interior Committee of the Knesset visited the Orient House and met with Faisal Husseini, who pastor also met on a subsequent trip. He was one of the main negotiators of the Palestinians. He was a very honored leader of the Palestinians. But Israel Hawkins stood in front of a microphone at the Sokolov House in Tel Aviv, calling upon Netanyahu and Arafat to meet with him to give a green light to rebuilding the temple. Now is the time, said Hawkins, an American author and historian, when there are talks about Jerusalem. As long as the problem of the Temple Mount is not solved to the satisfaction of the Arabs and the Jews, if a solution won't be found, a worldwide nuclear war will occur. It says, Hawkins, a descendant of a Jewish family that fled Europe, pulled out from his briefcase ready sketches and colored photos declaring, this is the third temple. In all these photos, it all seems very nice. The altar, the servants' wings, the Holy of the Holies. Hawkins suggests to build the temple 100 meters northeast of the Dome of the Rock on a vacant piece of land without damaging the holy Islamic sites. And let me tell you, this was something that shocked him because every other group, religious leader, teacher in Israel who wants to rebuild the temple says we must destroy the Dome of the Rock. Well, Pastor had all the archaeological proof from Asher Kaufman, who we met also, and knew, and it was all in Yechezkiah's prophecies. We all know these things. Let me get to some of how they described it here. He says, the prophet Yechezkiah saw in a vision from 585 BY, I'm throwing that in, BY, the temple that will be built. He saw there a public structure standing to the south of the temple. This structure is none other than the Muslims' Dome of the Rock that is still standing these days. That is why it is not necessary to fight the Arabs on this, and nothing has to be destroyed. Yahweh is showing us we don't have to fight over the Temple Mount. We can and must build the temple on a vacant piece of land. The Dome of the Rock will stay at its place, and we will erect a wall that will divide and separate between the worshipers from the two religions. Hawkins says that we have to be quick since the next Holocaust is just around the corner. For a moment there, he sounds like an eccentric who landed from another planet, because this was an utter shock to them, all of them, even the non-religious who don't really put much stock in these things. But at the same time, his words sounded serious and well-founded. He brought with him the engineer David Heimerman, who put on a kippah on his head and described the temple. The engineer showed aerial photos of the Temple Mount, and it all looked so simple and clear. See, Yahweh's plan is simple, and it's clear. What's not simple is mankind's rebellion and mankind's stubbornness and attitudes, the same attitudes they had towards Samuel. Remember, the same attitude they had towards Samuel is what rules the day today. He says, here will be the aids' quarters, and from here is the entrance. And the lamp will stand here. From here the offerings will be brought in with wonders of technology. Now remember, this is 1997. The internet was just now starting to come into use in the homes. I think it was more popular in Israel at that time than because they were going crazy with cell phones already by that time. And it says, the picture that came out looked like a huge complex filled with windows like a shopping mall and a hotel, with its white gleaming color and soft straight lines. They were amazed at this coming out here. Now, he goes on to say how, we were there for quite some time on that trip, I think over 6 weeks, there doing and pushing this work here. But something else took place, and if I had just another minute or two to tell you what else took place when we were there, because we were there. We left here, Abelin, on 3/2/97, and I'd have to go back. I didn't check the exact date, but it was around a little after the new moon that year, about 4:10 or so that we got back, because it was a late feast that year, like this year, much like this year, where it was toward the end of the 4th Roman. But we would watch the news in our apartment, and we saw this big controversy arising, okay? There was a settlement located in between Jerusalem and Bethlehem that was along a main artery that the Palestinians used, and they wanted to use it to maintain the connection between it. Well, Netanyahu had other ideas, and the neighborhood was called Har Homa, all right? And they built a settlement there. And they broke ground. Now listen to this. This is all going on in the news, every day on the news while we were there. Big controversy. They had riots going on, all kinds of trouble. We didn't know we thought a war was about to break out. I mean, a massive war. It was that bad. And it says, and we heard booms and all this too. We didn't know what was going on, except what was coming over the news. Netanyahu, during his first term of office, broke ground on the project in March of 1997, just 3.5 years. This is in the news. This is, what was the name of it? The spokesman.com. Okay, just 3.5 years after a landmark interim peace accord with the Palestinians reached by his more moderate predecessor. That was Rabin. Remember, Rabin was the prime minister when it was signed. Then he was assassinated. Shimon Peres, who we also met with privately, just the three of us at a table, he became the interim prime minister. Then at the next election, Netanyahu took over, and he shuts the thing down. Listen, he defended the move by citing Israel's claims as the sovereign power and the ancient Jewish connection to Jerusalem. But the project, that is Har Homa housing project, was seen as a sign of bad faith and led to violent protests and a halt in the peace negotiations at that time. A halt. As the other article we quote about Netanyahu, it says Netanyahu in 97 reversed or stymied. That means stopped or stalled, stopping it, much of the Oslo Accord, contending that it offered too many quick concessions, that sacrifices, remember, caused the sacrifice to stop in Daniyl 9:27 and jeopardized Israel's safety. All right, so while we were there, and at this time, if everyone will stand, while we were there in Israel, this 3.5 years came to a halt. And for the next 20 years, Pastor has been promoting and letting the leaders know about the last 3.5 years, what to expect, and how to get Yahweh's protection if they'll lay hold of it. And with it, Everybody remain standing. I'm losing my voice here. We'll turn the services over to the great Kohan Benjamin Hawkins.
Wow, did you see that? One of the men that went to Israel. Shalom, everyone. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You may be seated. Okay, let's just continue where all the speakers left off. And remember everything that was said. It's vitally important. So, can I have my first title slide? The title of this slideshow is going to be called, And a Time to Build Up. A Time to Build Up. Now, where did all this information come from? Can I have the second slide? Everything that we're talking about comes from this book, this foundational book, The Mark of the Beast. And I want you to notice this gematria. The Mark of the Beast, Volume 1. You see what's written on it? Volume 1? Gematria is first mentioned in this book. You see that number? Whose number is that? 1934. Who's that pointing to? It's pointing to the witness. Yisrael Hawkins, born in 1934. Can I have my next slide? Now notice this. The first mention of gematria is in chapter 7 called The Number of the Beast. Chapter 7, The Number of the Beast, 1934 again? Gee, what another coincidence. And notice it's on page 87. 87 in gematria is 834, the month and the date the witness was born. 8/28, 1934. Remember also 87 is when the book of Israel or the book of Yahweh came out. Can I have my next slide, if that's not enough? Here's Pastor, born 8/28, 1934 AY. That's number 3481, and it means who? Yisrael. Yisrael. There's your three witnesses. You need more? The man that wrote this book, you don't need to try to figure this book out other than reading it, getting it in your heart and mind and understanding it, but you don't need to try to interpret Daniyl or anything else. Pastor's already done it. It's already there. Just go and read it. When was this book written? Can I have my next slide? It was written in 1976. 1976 comes from 2088. The one, the other. The two witnesses. Is it really them this is talking about? Look at Isaiah 44:5. One will say, I belong to Yahweh, and the same will call himself with the name of Jacob. The other will subscribe with his hand and write, I belong to Yahweh, and surname himself with the name Yisrael. The one Jacob, the other Yisrael. Look at the number. 2088. The one, the other. Okay. Now that we've established that the man that wrote The Mark of the Beast knew what he was talking about and he was ordained to do so, let's move forward now to Ecclesiastes 3. Can we have the next slide? Ecclesiastes 3, 1 and 3 says, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven or under Yahweh's direction, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down. Today we're going to focus on a time to build up. A time to build up. If you'll notice, the Jewish number there is 835, and it means court. It's the very word used in Revelation 11:2, where it says, but the court which is outside the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it is given to the Gentiles, and the holy city they will tread underfoot 3.5 years. You see that? Superimposition there on the dome. There's the Dome of the Rock sitting on the temple platform there, and it's showing that it's in our articles about the temple, rebuilding the temple, how it's sitting south of where the temple should be built, and a dividing wall could be put there to keep the worshipers separated. That was the peaceful solution Pastor was presenting. Notice the second number, 1122. 1122 means to build. To build again, to rebuild. Rebuild. Rebuild what? This temple. That doesn't shock you. Let's go to the next slide. The House of Yahweh, Abilene, Texas, holds a design patent for the measurements of the third temple prophesied by Yahchanan in Yahchanan 40. Today we're going to be talking about the U.S. design patent number 306951. The House of Yahweh design patent was filed on 11/22/93. 11/22/93. You see that number 11/22? Didn't you just see that number? And a time to build, 11/22. Okay, now notice it says, Overseer Yisrael Hawkins, House of Yahweh, patented Yeketska's prophesied temple, 1993, comes up to 11/22. The very day. And it means to rebuild. Don't forget, it means to rebuild. Can I have my next slide? This patent, remember the Oslo Accord, as the Great Kohan just told you, went into effect on 10/13. Okay? So this patent was filed exactly 40 days later. Exactly 40 days later. And I want to tell you something about patents. It's not important when the patent's granted. If you go online and read, it tells you that it's important when you filed it because it proves you're the first one. Okay? So don't let it bother you that this is when it was filed. That's the most important date. So let's look at the gematria for 40 days. It's 11/31 and it means it's from 11/29, the same word. It means to build, to restore. To build and restore. Yes, Yisrael Hawkins patented Yeketska's temple 40 days after the 7-year peace plan went into effect. Can I have my next slide? Now, I'm only going to focus on the 1997, March 1997 trip. Okay, on 3/2/97, 3/2. 32 in Greek means messenger. It means pastor. Okay, what a coincidence, right? We're sitting on the 32nd parallel right here in Abelin. Go look, 32, messenger, pastor. The great pastor Israel Hawkins, the great Kohan David Heimerman Hawkins, and the great Kohan Shaul departed from Abelin on 3/2 to Israel to preach the rebuilding of the temple to the leaders or the kings and the multitudes. Yisrael Hawkins and the authorized House of Yahweh are the only ones on the face of the earth authorized and prophesied to bring this message. So they departed on 3/2. Look at the gematria. Departed 3/2, 11/22. The day they patented the temple, right? And I want you to remember, 1997 was when they went. 1997, it means a noise, sounding, multitude, to make a noise, to cry aloud, to stir up. 97 in the Greek, 1997 means gathering, to gather together. And guess what? You heard it from the first speaker today. It's from 1909. 1909 is superimposition. Remember the superimposition of the temple on the mount there. It also means multitudes, crowds, and stirring. Stirring. That's what a trumpet does. It stirs you to action. It arouses you to action. Can I have my next slide? Now, pastors put out a news release, fixing to come out here, and the great Kohan just told you about this press conference. I'm only going to talk about the March 1997 trip. Okay, because something was fixing to take place, okay, in this prophecies. Now, pastor says, remember, Yahweh sent me to the leaders, governmental, religious, and educational of both Arabs and Hebrew to show them what to expect during the last 3.5-year time period and to present them with a peaceful solution that will change hearts and minds. And then he gives the press conferences, the names and the locations and the people involved in this little box here, 3/1997. This is from his newsletter. All I did was copied it. Can I have my next slide? Now, Yisrael Hawkins said he was sent, right? Let's prove it. Revelation 10:11 said, and he said to me, you, and that word you is added coincidentally from the sermon on 10/11/03. Remember, this is Revelation 10:11. Pastor said, you is added. He said, must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. And that word again, and he said in that same sermon, means to restore to life. To restore to life. So notice, when you put in, and he said to me, must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, languages, and kings, whose number comes up? 3479, Yisrael. Yisrael must prophesy. Now look, Mattithyah 24:14 backs it up. It says, and this message of the kingdom will be preached to all the world by a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. When you type in the Mattithyah 24:14 preacher, you get the same number. 3479, Yisrael. Case closed. or open, depending on what side of the fence you're on. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Let's look at further proof. The one sent in 1934. Romans 10:14 and 15 says, "How then can they call upon him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him in whom they have not heard? And how will they hear over there in Israel without a preacher? And how can he preach unless he's sent?" Notice, 1934. It doesn't say 1936 when Pope Francis was born. Okay, look at the next one. Patented Yeketska's Temple, 11/22/1993 after Yeshua, 1074. Oh, wow. Isn't that somebody's tag number that means generation? That started in 1934 in Mattithyah 24:34. And today's Omer what? Yeah, 34 today. Woo! Okay, next slide, please. Now, I showed you a list of press conferences. You can check this out yourself, word for word. Here's what's on it. 3/1997 press conference on rebuilding the temple, Tel Aviv interview on radio, Kol Chai, Tel Aviv, Ranan Cohen, Labor Party chairman, Knesset, Jerusalem, Sheikh Raed Salah, leader of Islamic movement, El Fam. All I did was take exactly what Pastor had in his news release. Notice, it's word number 2098. 2098 goes to 2088. The two witnesses, the one, the other. 2098 in the Greek means message. Message. What were they taking to Israel? The message. And look what it's from. It's from 32, and it means a messenger, envoy, one who is sent, pastor, and the priests that were with him, the malakim that were with him that accompanied him. Can I have my next slide? Now, while they were there, Comet Hale-Bopp, now you need to remember, Comet Hale-Bopp was the most viewed comet in history of the world. You could see it with the naked eye for 18 months. 18 months you could see this thing in the sky. It was very bright, and it was, let me just read this. It says, Comet Hale-Bopp is a comet that was perhaps the most widely observed of the 20th century and one of the brightest seen for many decades. Hale-Bopp was discovered on July 23rd, 1995, which we'll talk about in another sermon, separately by two men, Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp. One lived in New Mexico, one lived in Arizona. Actually, I got my sides correct. Arizona, New Mexico. On the four corners, the cross. We'll talk about that later. Notice, Alan Hale, Thomas Bopp, 1074? Really? Isn't that dagging them to maybe showing us that this was seen for who? Who was this for? Who's this message relating to? That's right, the House of Yahweh. And remember, this tag, 1074, wasn't even issued for another 19 years. So we couldn't have known this then. My next slide, please. Now, Comet Hale-Bopp is called the Great Comet of 1997. This is from NASA's website. And it made its closest approach on 3/22, March 22nd, 1997. Gee, what a coincidence. 3/22, does that ring a bell? You see that man pointing at a tag that he was issued 16 or 19 years later? 3/22. Okay, and notice, discovered in Arizona, New Mexico, 3/22 and 30/22, right? Drop the zero. You remember the rule. So it made its closest approach while these men were in Israel. Okay, because there was a message that it was bringing. That eccentric messenger that they were talking about. Remember, comets are known as messengers, heavenly messengers. But let's look at 3/22 in the next slide. Let's look at the definition of 3/22. It means backward, afterward, west, time to come. Time to come. And 3/22 in the Greek means to lift up and show, to show forth, proclaim, to lift up anything on high and exhibit it for all to behold, to show accurately and clearly. Didn't we just hear a news release from Israel saying how accurate and clear the description was that Pastor gave and the Kohans that accompanied him gave about this temple? Gee, another coincidence. To show accurately and clearly, to disclose what was hidden. Yeah, it was hidden in Yahchanan 40, verse 5. The peaceful solution to building the next temple. They were showing it. To exhibit, to proclaim anyone as elected to an office, such as a king or messenger. And remember, Yahchanan 40, verse 4. Remember the number 40. It's going to be important even in later sermons. He says in 40, verse 4, to the Son of Man, declare all you see to the house of Israel. Okay. And remember, the two witnesses' new light. You get 322. Remember, this is the work of the two witnesses. Can I have my next slide? So they went to Israel in 1997. Put in Israel 1997 and you get a tag number again. A tag number. 322 when Hail Bop was making its closest approach. But notice Jewish 2278. It means to make a loud noise. Remember what 1997 meant? To sound. Reverberate? Hey, I think Greenblatt said something about a peace plan would reverberate throughout the whole earth. You remember that recently? It means from 2279, meaning a sound, a noise, blast, report, roar, a rumor, fame. Remember, Revelation 10:7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh malak. Remember, not back when Jacob went to Israel back in 1967, but in the days of the voice of the seventh malak, when he will begin to sound. You see that word sound? The great plan of Yahweh would be finished, as he declared to his servants the prophets. Now, this picture that you see down here is hanging out here in the common area where you walk in the front of the sanctuary. That picture's been hanging there since I came to the House of Yahweh in 1998. 21 years ago, that picture was hanging out there. And look what Pastor's doing. Yahweh, this is what it says underneath. Yahweh's last day's witness, blowing the shofar in Zion for the House of Yahweh. Yael 2:1, March 1997. Wow, what a coincidence. Blowing the shofar. Well, let's look at the word hail and bop. Can I have my next slide? Let's look at the etymology here of hail bop. Hail means salvation. It means health. It's where the word health or whole comes from. It means whole, healthy, well-being. It means exhibiting or restored to vigorous, great health. Get this, caused to do so through pressure or necessity by physical, moral, or intellectual means. We'll keep the moral, right? We'll circle that one. Because he was showing the peaceful solution to building the next temple. Let's look at bop now. Now, you wouldn't think bop would mean this, would you? But you can go online yourself. I didn't make it up. It means messenger. It means messenger. It means leader. A famous leader. Yeah, he's famous to us, isn't he? He's going to be real famous here shortly. Once this is all, once Yahweh opens the eyes of everybody here. Can I have my next slide? Now, I'm not going to get into it today, but something occurred on the 11th of the 4th Roman month, or April 11th, 40 days after these men went to Israel. That was 40 days later on the 11th. There was a sign seen in the heavens, okay? Well, we'll get into that. 4/11/1997, you get the word, one number is 2166, and it means time, times, fixed appointed period, or times. Remember, the 3.5 years was fixing to shut down. It was shutting down right in the midst, right there when these men were in Israel. What a blessing, man. I could have been there. I could have been part of that. But we were part of that. Remember what the great Gahan said? All of us were part of that if we were part of this work. But I'm still jealous. Okay, and notice, Yahchanan 40 is what they were preaching, 40 verse 5, in Revelation 11. And you get the number 411. Okay, remember that date, 411. Very important. Can I have my next slide? The second number in 40 days means to pass between, to go through, cut off. Cut off. Cut off. But notice 798 in the Greek. It means a star, a group of stars, a constellation. And there was a constellation where this sign was seen. We're going to talk about it. Notice, it means wandering stars. It says these are not planets, the motion of which is scarcely noticed by the commonalty, but far more probably comets. Comets, yes, you're going to learn about 2 comets that made a cross in the heavens at the time these men were in Israel preaching this message. By the way, comets were considered messengers from heaven of change or doom. Notice heaven's messenger. Remember heaven's messenger in Psalm 19, 1074? In my final slide, I'm setting you up for the next sermon. Some of the women talked about it today. Ecclesiastes 3:1. We talked about a time today, a time to build. Ecclesiastes 3:1's to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war, a time of war, a time of war, 666. You see that picture of those comets heading for the great red spot of Jupiter? Cosmic crash, the cover of Time magazine. Remember, for every time there is a purpose. Cosmic crash, 666. 523:94 is when that... Didn't Pastor tell us about a dream on 523, 21 years later in 2015? You all remember that? All right, that's all I got time for right now. If you'd all please stand. It's been a great honor and privilege. I'd like to turn it over now to one of Yahweh's great priests, the great Kohan Yehuda Hawkins.
Shalom. Shalom. Please be seated. We're going to look today, turn to page 705 in your book of Yahweh. We're going to look at Micahyah chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. If you're using a Bible, it's Micah. Chapter 3, verses 9 through 12 is on page 705 in the book of Yahweh, where the scripture reads, Hear now, O heads of the house of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all equity. All equity, they pervert it. In other words, that's righteousness. Who build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. Now, it's talking about a place now. Her heads judge for reward, and her priests teach, give instruction in the law for pay, and her prophets divine for money. Yet they lean upon Yahweh and say, Is not Yahweh among us? No evil can come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field, Jerusalem will become heaps of rubble, and the mountain of the house of Yahweh like the high places of a forest. I don't know about you, but that looks very confusing. First they say they're going to plow Zion, then they're going to build a house of Yahweh. I wish these guys would make up their minds. But it doesn't matter. The scripture you'll see what it means today. The word divine that is written in Micaiah 3 verse 11 is translated from the Hebrew word yakasamu. This word is listed on page 663 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, which shows this word means false prophets. Keep your thoughts and your notes right. Make sure to look these things up in the book of Revelation, because this scripture here talks about a lot of things that are repeated in the book of Revelation. False prophets is one of them. The word lean that is written in Micaiah 3 verse 11 is translated from the Hebrew word yoshono. This word is listed on page 732 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, who shows this word means to rely on, to trust in. Remember the psalm in you, O God, in the King James. I'm using the King James there. We put our trust, or O Lord. So just take it in thought. The word say that is written in Micaiah 3 verse 11 is translated from the Hebrew word amar. This word is listed on page 33 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, which shows this word means to declare. In other words, we declare lunch is served. In other words, we're telling you like it is, or they think they are anyway. The words is not that are written in Micahyah 3 verse 11 is translated from the Hebrew word halua. This word is listed on page 399 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, which shows this word asks a question where there is an emphatic yes as the answer, such as, is not, lo, surely. Is it raining? Yes, sir, it is, or something like that. I'm giving some illustrations. In other words, it's asking a question is showing that this is supposed to be an established fact. The word because of you that are written in Micahyah 3 verse 12 are translated from the Hebrew compound word bagalalakam. Kind of weird. Which is a combination of the Hebrew subordination. We'll try again. The Hebrew subordinating conjunction ba and the Hebrew word galalakam. The Hebrew subordinating conjunction ba is listed on page 56 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, which shows this word means by. The Hebrew word galalakam is listed on page 137 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, which shows this word means idols, in other words, gods. The word mountain that is written in Micahyah 3:12 is translated from the Hebrew word har. This word is listed on page 372 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament by Julius I, which shows this word means to be elevated, to be raised up, to be lifted up. The words the house of Yahweh that are written in Micahyah 3:12 are translated from the Hebrew word beit, or bet. This word is listed on page 82 of the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon by Benjamin Davidson, which shows this word means house of God. The word forest that is written in Micahyah 3:12 is translated from the Hebrew word yor, Y-O-R, Yod Ayin Resh in Hebrew. This word is listed on page 588 of a Hebrew and Chaldee lexicon to the Old Testament of Julius I, which shows this word means where the wild beasts dwell, Yada, the kingdom of Yada. Remember Genesis chapter 49 on this one. Warlike people, a people that are warlike. All these are in that definition. So this is what Micahyah 3 verses 9 through 12 is telling you. Hear now, O heads of the house of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all evil and pervert all equity, who build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. Her heads judge for reward, and her priests teach, give instruction in their law for pay, and her prophets prophesy falsely for money. Yet they declare they worship Yahweh and say, Yahweh is among us, no evil can come upon us. Therefore Zion will be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem will be made heaps of rubble by these God worshippers, and the uplifting of the house of their God or their gods, that is Yada, will be taken to a high place where the beasts dwell, as Revelation says, and where there is an army of warlike people. And what nation was a nation of war in Revelation? Anybody got an idea? I heard it finally. Rome. So what this is saying is, they will uplift the house of their God, Yada, right in the middle of it, just like Pastor said, and it says in Genesis chapter 49, and all of them will be taken to a high place where the beasts and the army of a warlike people are. And it is still there. Because Rome did have a part in the Holocaust. I'm talking about the Rome of World War II. They did take part in bringing people to the death chambers. That is what Micahyah 3, 9, and 12 is telling you. It's talking about the kingdom of Yada. Just as it said, the scepter is talking about they would move all the way from where they were, bring those false gods and their false prophets to a high place of authority and respect in the world, in a nation of warlike people, and a place where the beasts dwell. Remember, Revelation is talking about those beasts. May Yahweh bless your understanding. Please stand, and I turn the services over to the great Kohan, Ilya Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. And of course, looking in the news, it's always great to have to bolster our confidence in the faith of what Israel Hawkins has been teaching for 40 years, to see things come to pass, to hear things being said by the highest, most educated people on the face of this earth. They just now grasp the very basics of what he's been bringing. And once again, we're going to show the CDC urgent threat list, that fungal infection called Candida auris, how it's made the news. And keep in mind, this is a creation of theirs. They're saying we can't control it. It's out of hand. We try to take our best drugs and we put them in the room. We spray the room and they still can't kill it. We have to cut out the tiles, take out the ceilings, and we still can't kill it. But keep in mind, where did the creation come from? Where did it take place? Under whose guidance and advice were these things allowed? Remember, it's the same place that will tell you don't eat too much salt, but pork is okay. Keep that in mind. Don't fool yourselves. And then going on to the doctors of this world, of course, they're out there, and there's some that may have a desire to help people. No one's downing that. But of course, it shows there were 47 million stolen prescriptions. These are prescription drugs, of course, that prescribed to someone, and someone that has not been prescribed that drug takes it and uses or sells it for their own purpose. Well, 67% of those stolen drugs were taken by, guess who? Doctors and nurses. And you'll even see one where a lady went in, she was getting treatment, and due to a nurse's addiction to drugs, she got hepatitis C. And it'll explain how she got this. But it was a lady that sought the advice and the guidance of these doctors, who once again created Candida auris through their guidance and advice. They created these superbugs, and their drugs are not controlling these things. So consider who you would seek advice from and the problems they have. They're still trying to cure cancer, but they won't admit they started it. And then the United States, of course, remember in and around the great river Euphrates. Remember the countries in and around the great river Euphrates, and what Revelation chapter 6 tells us, this power is given to them. And of course you have the beast, the two-horned beast, in Revelation 13 that receives authority from the first beast. All of these things being done under the authority and according to prophecy. The United States sent an aircraft carrier and bomber. Now, this would be a heavy attack piece of equipment to actually cause war. Now, Iran has said that you can bomb us, we still will not surrender. If you push it, we will all burn with fire. So keep that in mind. You're dealing with people that are not going to give in. They recognize the United States as a bully. Revelations calls it a beast because it takes, it devours, it ravages things. That's the character trait of this system. It's a beast, and it really takes from everyone and everywhere. But also going into the trade war. But don't forget, that warship in and around the great river Euphrates, go home and look at a map. The great river Euphrates, you'll see Turkey, you'll see Syria, you'll see Iraq, you'll see Iran. Pay attention to these things. They don't come out in the news as much as they used to, but it's still going on. But then a trade war with China, and this was very interesting. I finally had to seek someone to see how the United States benefits from this trade war, and it was very interesting. By the United States putting tariffs on China, you would think that would be bad business for us. But when you as a consumer go into Walmart or somewhere else, you always bought the cheaper product, and those are China products. Well, now the product is becoming as equal to the U.S. product as it ever has before. Now it's about the same price. They studied, and most Americans are more likely to buy companies they know, which are U.S. products. So in raising tariffs on China, they cut down the sales on China, and they up the sales of U.S. product, causing you to buy because you want to pay for what you think is quality. even though it's the same product most likely, probably bottled in the same facility. It just says packaged in the U.S. But China being touted, and of course these warships here recently, another warship sent through the Strait of Taiwan. You have China and you have Taiwan, and there's a strait that goes in between them. Of course, the United States selling warships in between those. And remember, China considers the one China policy. They say Taiwan is theirs, and the actions of the United States recognizes Taiwan as its own entity, its own individual country. And then, of course, they say the nuclear threat is the greatest now that it has ever been since World War II. And why is it that way? Well, bombs were dropped in World War II. That's why now it's the greatest, and they're coming out and saying that. And pay attention where he says it could even be an accidental war. Now, accidental doesn't mean I accidentally hit the button. It's saying that they may misread the other country's way of conducting themselves, or they may do something that's considered inappropriate, so they go ahead and start the war. They launch the missile. They activate something, and that could cause it to take place. But it's the greatest threat since World War II. And then you have Syria. The United States is saying that President Assad is most likely getting ready to do another chemical attack on his people, and this is what they're going to do after he does it, before he ever does it. So keep in mind, if you know that much, you probably have something to do with the chemical attack. And then, of course, finishing off with the peace plan, these things we're seeing with the peace plan, watch carefully these countries that are coming in. These other countries that are being pulled in, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Jordan, you have Egypt, you have the United Arab Emirates, you have Qatar. These are not being brought in because let's all be friends. They're being brought in to pressure. They're Arab countries, and they're being brought in to pressure Palestine into this agreement. This is an agreement that Palestine is going to be offered, and it's not like they're being, you can take it or you can leave it. It's being told you can take it or you can take it, but you're going to take it. But all of these things are showing prophecy coming to pass, and they're trying to bring peace through war, just as we've been told for many years. At this time, if we could please go ahead and play the news.
Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news this week, we're going to be covering the global trade tensions between China and the U.S. They may be taking a turn for the worse. We'll have those details. Also, the U.S. is sending a clear message, a powerful message to the Middle East, specifically Iran, wanting to let them know who's in charge. Right. And also one analyst's thoughts on how we could have an accidental nuclear war. So that's kind of a scary point to think about right there, an accidental nuclear war. So these stories and more. But first, we spoke about this a few weeks ago, but felt it important to bring this report to our viewers again because of the situation. Now, the CDC has added Candida auris to its urgent threat list, and it is indeed something the public should be aware of. Candida auris is a fungal infection resistant to treatment, and the number of cases are continuing to grow.
Well, in an article published in the New York Times, they called it a mystery infection spanning the globe in a climate of secrecy. The popular newspaper warns the rise of Candida auris embodies a serious and growing public health threat, drug-resistant germs.
Now, one example was given of a patient who had left the hospital and the entire room that they had been in was treated as a biohazard. Now, the fungus covered the entire room from ceiling to floor, including every object like the bed and even the blinds. Now, therefore, the CDC is warning healthcare workers to take extra precautions at work.
An internal medicine specialist, Dr. Anita Ogden, explained to CBS News why we should be extremely concerned about this particular fungus, saying it's resistant to multiple antifungal drugs that we have, and it's also resistant to all the things that we used to eradicate bacterial and fungal strains in the hospital.
Well, she gave an example of a hospital room in London where they used sodium hydroxide to aerosolize the room, and afterwards only one organism grew back, which was Candida auris. So, Ogden stated, this is definitely an alarming development in the global emerging threat of superbugs. And that is a scary thought, using something like sodium hydroxide and not even being able to kill. I mean, having that grow back.
That's right, that's right. Well, she went on to explain those at risk, greatest risk, that is, of infection are people with weakened immune systems, such as long-term health care facility residences who have internal catheters or IVs, anyone in hospitals, intensive care units, newborns, and anyone who takes immune-suppressing drugs for illnesses like diabetes. So that covers a fairly large number of people already, but there's an even greater concern if this superbug is not gotten under control, how it will affect the rest of the population.
Well, currently there have been 587 cases reported in the U.S., 309 in New York, 104 in New Jersey, and 1 in Connecticut. Now, while doctors are trying to learn as much as they can about this drug-resistant superbug that seems to be spreading quickly, there is little they can do to help those infected. Now, one doctor from the NASA University Medical Center in New York told reporters, "You may be treating it with an ineffective drug."
Wow. Well, in other medical news, a new report is out exposing another growing epidemic in the medical field today. Now, this is called opioid diversion, which means healthcare professionals are stealing their patients' prescriptions for their own personal use. In 2018, over 47 million prescriptions alone were stolen.
Wow, 47 million. Well, CBS Evening News interviewed Lauren Lolini, one woman who experienced life-altering consequences due to opioid diversion. Now, in 2009, she went to the hospital for kidney surgery and left with hepatitis C and a liver infection. Lolini reported, "My life dramatically changed because now I am a 40-year-old woman with a 1-year-old daughter who is so fatigued I can't work."
Yeah, that's horrible. A hospital technician who infected Lolini and at least 18 others was Christian Parker. Parker, who is now serving a 30-year jail sentence, stole Lolini's pain meds and then filled the contaminated syringe with saline and returned it to the surgical tray she got them from.
Well, the data firm known as Protenus released their findings this week that show opioid diversion is a growing problem. The 47 million plus prescriptions stolen last year was a 126% increase from 2017. Now, they also found in 67% of the cases, doctors and nurses were the ones responsible, and those are the ones that you're supposed to be trusting and are responsible. You're supposed to be trusting them with your health, and 67% were found to be the ones that were actually stealing.
That's right. It's more of a problem internally than it is externally. Well, Dr. Stephen Lloyd of Tennessee was one such doctor. For Dr. Lloyd, it began with just half of a pain pill his dentist had given him a few weeks earlier from a dental procedure. Then some Loratab pain pills he had found in his aunt's medicine cabinet, and in just 3.5 years he went from half of a 5 milligram Loratab to 500 milligrams of OxyContin. That's like taking 100 Vicodin pills every day.
Wow. Well, one way he got the drugs was by prescribing his patients a stronger form of the drug they were already on, and he would collect the lesser strength pain meds from them. Now, because there isn't a requirement for what is done with the old pills, it wasn't known if they were flushed down the toilet or put in his pocket. Now, finally, his father told him he had a problem, and Lloyd admitted himself to a 30-day rehab center.
Well, today Lloyd is still a practicing physician and oversees Tennessee's Substance Abuse Services Department as the assistant commissioner. He's a strong advocate for California's Proposition 46, which would require random drug and alcohol testing for doctors as well as other measures. Dr. Lloyd warns that without making changes, many more patients are at risk of being cared for by medical professionals who are getting high on their prescriptions.
Wow, scary thought. Mm-hmm. Well, we now focus our attention on some of the world events, including a recent message the U.S. is sending to Iran. Our field correspondent Larry McGee has been covering this story as well as a few others. Larry, just what exactly is the message that the U.S. is sending to the Middle East, specifically for Iran?
Certain elements within the United States have set their minds to gain control of Iran, and there is apparently nothing that can cause them to alter that objective. In one of their boldest moves to date, the U.S. recently dispatched an aircraft carrier group to the Middle East in a bid to send a clear message to Iran. Analysts say the carriers being sent to the region isn't so much an abnormality, but it's rather the kind of carriers that are being sent, which in this case is more like a battle group, also accompanied by bombers. That, plus aggressive rhetoric by Advisor Bolton, is what's getting everyone's attention. Among other things, Security Advisor Bolton has hitched on to the deployment of the battle group the statement that any attack on United States interests or on those of our allies will be met with unrelenting force. As a pretext for the action, the United States reports having received intelligence alluding to potential Iranian attacks on American soil and in American waters. Tensions on behalf of Tehran are believed to have escalated after the U.S. declared the Iranian Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization, and then there are also U.S. sanctions which are geared towards destroying Iran's oil exports. The nation's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, has stated that he believes that the current U.S. administration is setting things in place for accidents to happen. He attributes these efforts to what he calls the B team, made up of Advisor Bolton, Benjamin Netanyahu, Sheikh Khalid bin Zayed, and bin Salman, who all want confrontation, according to Zarif. The Iranian foreign minister says that he believes it is important for the prudent people, the grown-ups, to prevent that confrontation. Nations are confronting each other not just militarily, but economically as well. The money war between China and the U.S. is still going at a rolling boil, and President Trump just turned the heat up by increasing tariffs on China yet again. Subsequent to that, Beijing released a statement saying that China deeply regrets that it will have to take necessary countermeasures. In layman terms, that means retaliation and tit for tat in response to the new taxes that are reported to potentially span everything from U.S. agricultural products, machinery, energy, and natural gas. The new tariffs, which represent a 25% increase on Chinese imports, are said to total $250 billion and were levied by the president right in the middle of economic negotiations. There seems to be no negotiating with Iran. In addition to other actions, America is mulling over a plan to deploy 10,000 soldiers to the Middle East in response to alleged attacks. The acting Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, stated to reporters that America's objective at this point is to avoid a miscalculation by Iran. Strangely, the acting secretary says the U.S.'s latest moves have been about deterrence and not war. To this, Senator Lindsey Graham added that he believes the best thing is for everyone to calm down and for Iran to back off, and he is hoping that the show of force will result in de-escalating and not escalating. Things are escalating between House Democrats and the president after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi accused the president of a cover-up for being uncooperative in a congressional investigation. After calling off a meeting with Democrats, President Trump says he will not work with the Blue Party until they stop investigating him. Ms. Pelosi has accused the president further of throwing tantrums and of obstructing justice and participating in a cover-up, and that, she says, could be an impeachable offense. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Kassan Jeff, back to you.
Well, based on what we've seen in times past and the comments made by the Iranian president, Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran is not going to take this lying down, and they are preparing themselves and their people for some type of conflict with the United States. Ironically, the United States is kind of trying to force other countries to come into peace with them when it's obvious that the United States does not have peace and unity within their own government.
Right, and even though our representatives are saying this is for a deterrent only, the other nations are not looking at it as just a deterrent. They're preparing for war.
That's right. Well, the U.S. State Department said it's expecting new chemical attacks by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Washington is also promising a quick response to such attacks, despite not having proven the previous attacks had anything to do with the Syrian government. Now, all of this coming after U.S. President Donald Trump said he was pressured by the U.S. arms industry to keep hundreds of American soldiers in Syria.
Also, who does make the decision on U.S. foreign policy regarding the use of military force? Well, one might say the president, of course. but recent statements from President Trump would lead one to believe differently. Now, in a Fox News interview, President Trump said, "You do have a military-industrial complex. They do like war." Well, the president went on to say, "I said I want to bring our troops home, and the place went crazy. You have people here in Washington, they never want to leave," of course referring to Syria and these countries that were involved in, almost like we've covered before, the war is big business, and they don't want that business to end.
Yeah, superficially, you would think if the United States, as the big brother to the world, is working to bring peace, once we've reached a certain point, let's pull our troops out of there. But that's not the case. Like you mentioned, big business, big money. Well, the Trump presidency is not the only president that has promised peace prior to being elected. President, and then once in office, turned around or was pressured, as he said, into starting a war. Take a look at this video courtesy of RT on a few other recent examples.
Nations making progress toward freedom will find America is their friend. We'll promote our values. We'll promote the peace.
We've lost thousands of American lives, spent nearly $1 trillion, alienated allies, neglected emerging threats, all in the cause of fighting a war for well over 5 years in a country that had absolutely nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks.
I will never send our finest into battle unless necessary, and I mean absolutely necessary, and will only do so if we have a plan for victory with a capital V.
Well, it certainly is hard to argue with the history they just showed. Well, the U.S. just sent 2 warships through the Taiwan Straits with the eyes on China, closely monitoring the situation and straining U.S.-China relations. Now, this is looked as a move by the Trump administration supporting the small island, who says that it is its own independent nation, whereas Beijing says that there's only one China and that Taiwan belongs to them. Now, Commander Clay Doss, a spokesman for the U.S. Navy, said that the ship's transit through the strait demonstrates the U.S. commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Well, this isn't new, as the U.S. sends ships through the straits at least once a month since last July, but has increased these naval exercises in recent months. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lu Kong, said, "We are fully aware of the whole process, and we have expressed concern to the U.S. side. The Taiwan issue is the most sensitive and important issue in China-U.S. relations. We urge the U.S. to uphold the One China principle and abide by the regulations of the Three China U.S. Joint Communique and properly deal with Taiwan-related issues with caution so as to avoid further negative actions to China-U.S. relations and to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits."
Well, the threat of nuclear war is ringing alarm bells across the globe. Jim Jontras, a former U.S. diplomat, spoke to RT regarding the U.S. threat and America's part after a UN official warned that the world is closer to nuclear war than ever before. Now, he stated, "We and the Russians have the most nuclear weapons, and that at the beginning of the Cold Wars, measures were set up to avoid the dangers of an accidental war." Now, accidental is that one country could misread the other's intentions, potentially like with Iran and even the Russians.
And that could lead to that preemptive strike that several U.S. commanders have even mentioned that the Trump administration and defense ministers and so forth, secretaries have said, hey, look, all options are on the table. And so we already know that that's kind of in the cards that, hey, if necessary, we will preemptively strike if we think that there is a threat threatening our nation. Well, he continued, since we've gotten rid of the INF agreement, referring to medium-range missiles, and not knowing the fate of the START agreement, now that details intercontinental ballistic missiles, we don't know if those mechanisms of communication is breaking down to where the one side, especially if they have very little advance warning of possible attacks, might misread the other side's intentions.
Right, and it's really not that unreasonable to think, because the tensions are so high all over that, to misread someone seems like a very possible and likely situation to occur.
That's right.
Well, as the Trump administration gets closer to a date to unveil its long-awaited Mideast peace plan, the U.S. is planning on hosting a summit in Bahrain, a summit which the Palestinians vow to boycott. Now, it's an attempt to force the economic track over the political track, said Ahmed Mahdalani, an executive committee member of social development for the PLO. Now, he continued, more Palestinians want to end the occupation, not improve their lives under the occupation.
There are others from the Arab world that are lending their support from the Trump administration. The foreign ministers of Bahrain said the Kingdom of Bahrain hosting of the Peace Workshop for Prosperity is a continuation of its continuous and supportive approach to enable the Palestinian people to enhance their capabilities and strengthen their resources to achieve their legitimate aspiration. Also, the Kingdom of Jordan may also agree to the deal to appeal to the United States. And as we know, the Jordan holds they're kind of the governorship over that area there, that Temple Mount area, and so they are also have great relations with the United States.
Well, Jared Kushner's Middle East peace plan is shaping up and is closer to the day of the big reveal. Now, Kushner said that what we hope to do is to get to a great starting point, one that will get the Israelis and Palestinians to talking. Now, in that region, you have leaders that are trying to empower their people to have a better life, and you have leaders who are trying to repress their people using religion and other excuses as a reason to try to hold their people down.
Right now, it's unclear if anything in the plan will include the two-state solution. Kushner said, what we want to do is put something out based on logic where we can say that unquestionably this will lead to the Palestinians having a better life. But after the Palestinian leaders cut off diplomatic ties to the U.S. after President Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the question is, how does the U.S. reach them as a mediator to get the talk started?
Well, Israel is a very important country. It's the only democracy in the region as America's strongest ally, and that no one should be surprised if we ask Israel to make compromises in the deal. Now, Kushner also said that the deal offers Palestinians positive business solutions with economic incentives. Now, the plan is said to be released following the conclusion of the month of Ramadan.
That's right. And I know that everybody's waiting for this plan to be released, but we can see with kind of everything building, the tensions building around that area with Israel, and of course not just the Palestinians, but the entire Arab world. We see the tensions with Iran, we see the tensions with Syria. Whatever the case, we know that if something is not done to bring about some type of peaceful solution, as we mentioned several broadcasts ago with the doomsday clock being only 2 minutes to midnight, it's going to escalate to nuclear wars. And that's not just something that a few people agree on. That's what the majority of the nations know the direction of our world is heading to.
Yeah, and it's, as you mentioned there, with that, with the threat of nuclear war, now they're saying that it's never been higher since the end of World War II, of course, when the nuclear bombs were used at that time. So we're at that point again. They're not saying if, but when nuclear war comes. So with this peace plan, they've certainly built it up as something very big. It will be interesting to see how the Palestinians and the Israelis react. But certainly it's going to take quite a plan to bring them together because of all the hatred for the years that they've built up, just back and forth. And now it's almost as if they don't want to agree on anything, no matter if it would benefit them or not. So again, very interesting, and we're definitely awaiting the revealing here of this plan.
That's right. And like we've mentioned before, we are seeing China and Russia step up to the plate as well to get themselves involved in bringing some type of peace in the Middle East. China, especially with Iran, since Iran supplies the majority, a great portion of their oil, they don't want to see that cut off. So,
right, it seems like all the big players have a stake
That's right.
in what turns out with Israel and the Palestinians.
That's right. Well, if you'd like to find out more about current prophecy and, like we've mentioned before, what you can do to prepare yourself and your family to be safe for the impending danger of nuclear war, which everybody pretty much in the world agrees is the direction we're heading, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
Well, to contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can do so by emailing info@Yahweh.com. For any international calls, call the number that's on your screen now. And once again, if you still haven't checked out the two programs, the Yisrael Says program and the Ask Yisrael program, you can do so by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com. These are two excellent Bible study tools guaranteed to answer any of your scriptural questions, keep you occupied for hours looking at the scriptures and seeing precept upon precept, line upon line. Check it out. You'll greatly enjoy it.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.
At this time, if everybody would please stand, it's now time for the greatest part of the week. The greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrael, Abel Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. They said the only time they had was overtime. Was yesterday, and I said, "I'll take it." Oh, that's beautiful. The week kind of starts, with people calling saying, I just read this, or I just discovered this in the gematria, or something like that. And I'd say, well, that really needs to be told. So they said, when, who? And I said, well, you, of course. And a little bit out of breath here this morning. And anyway, they said, when? And I said, well, this Sabbath, of course. And so if you were anywhere around that south office, and was listening, you'd hear screams and listen, girls, shut down. We got a top-notch assignment. We got to get right on it. Shut down? What do we do with the money? Trash it. This is top assignment. Get that? Well, I may exaggerate a little. The men, they get louder than that when they go to get on them top assignments. And you can see these top assignments. I mean, they're beautiful. The stuff that was brought out here today, I don't see how anyone could ever doubt any at all. Praise Yahweh. And what we're seeing right now in this news, of course. Now, this is articles from Yedidiah. And I won't read all of this, but it's Israel accuses PA of inciting on excitement on temple. And, of course, this is talking about now the Temple Mount and the temple that is about to be replaced. I think I can tell this without getting anyone in trouble or anything, but Netanyahu flew over to one of our people to get the Temple Mount booklet. This was 2 weeks ago, and he flew there. I said, I don't know how all of those could have disappeared from that White House. Barack Obama had them full, but I guess they all disappeared. But anyway, he flew to one of our people and talked at length, but the only thing he really wanted was that Temple Mount booklet. And I said, well, that tells me a lot right there, that he would want that. Well, of course, as you could see from what Kohan Shaul brought out, you know, this is 20 years of House of Yahweh work, that more than 20 years, but that's since the peace treaty was shut down. I wrote about that peace treaty in the book, The Mark of the Beast. It was published. Now, we had that bound by a professional binder, Chapman. He's still in business, I think, in Abelin, isn't he? So we got record of us and the world when that information was put out about that 7-year peace treaty that would be signed, I said, in the book, and explained it in the Mark of the Beast. You can get that book. It's still available. You can read it online if you want to. I'd suggest you get the book. I suggest everyone out there you get the book and read it, because it shows the prophecies right up to the end. The end is us. The seventh work of Yahweh, the seventh lamp on the lampstand. That's us. Revelations 10:7. The Gematria backs that book up 100%. Yeah, I mean, from the time the book was written till now. But we have about 20 years of work where we were reaching the heads of every nation. And not only did we have the news conference, but as Shaul brought out and read you one of the news, he's going to read some more next week, newspapers that covered that. Over 50 journalists was there that night and covered that story as he brought out. And then after that, we went to go into them individually. I wanted to speak to every one of them individually. Well, before this thing was over, they wanted us to move to Israel. They said, you know, this would bring peace. This right here is the only thing that's going to bring peace. And, of course, I didn't see it in prophecy, so I put them off. But I said this way, well, one of these days, maybe soon. Well, of course, we're seeing a lot from the time the peace treaty was shut down to today. We're seeing the buildup of these wars. These are just some of it. DOD Moll's deploying 10,000 troops to Middle East. Tension with Iran. This and U.S. cannot confirm reports of use of chemical weapons. Now, this was covered on the news here. And if you remember the prophecy that I brought you concerning Damascus, it all rests on Damascus. Damascus is not out of the news yet. And in this 20 years that Yeshua showed, and Mattithyah 24 is going to get worse and worse. Daniyl shows it's going to get worse and worse. During that first half. Yeshua said in Mattithyah 24 verse 12, I believe, he says, this is the first half. The first half of what? Well, of course, that's 7 years. Anytime you see that, remember these scriptures that Daniyl showed, because all of this is prophecy. And as Yeshua said, the prophecy must be fulfilled. It's a must that it must be fulfilled. Why? The book of Yahweh lays out Yahweh's plans and prophecy, calls it prophecy. Yahweh is the only one that can foretell future events accurately. He's the only one. And he foretells his every move of his work. Now, he hides it here a little and there a little, so that a person must be inspired to bring this. As the buggy driver said, how can I understand? I have no one to teach me. Well, he knew more than most of the preachers do today. The preachers are struggling out there with these churches. There's 4,199 God-worshiping churches, and they don't have enough sense to know that they're condemned in the first 3 chapters of their Bibles and won't pay any attention to it. Evil like to gods. Well, Yahweh took the tree of life. He didn't take it. They put it away from them. Mankind put it away from them. He said, I'm going to give you 6,000 years and without it. And then I will bring it back in the last days. But in the last days, I will bring it back. Yeshua says, you won't see my face anymore until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of Yahweh. And then he says, the blessings, we bless you out of what? The house of Yahweh. Blessing? Yes. Blessed are those, Yeshua said, very last chapter of Revelations, verse 14, blessed are those with eternal life who keep Yahweh's laws out of the house of Yahweh. The very first thing that Yahweh tells you to do, go, Yeshua said, seek first the kingdom of Yahweh and his righteousness. That's the first thing. Seek it. The kingdom. I'll make you a kingdom of priests at my house. That's where you're made a priest. At Yahweh's house. That's where you're blessed. At Yahweh's house. Amos 3, I'll have no other work except that I've prophesied. All those prophecies are clear, and every one of them must come to pass. And Yeshua said, now, all of this that we're seeing right now, it's the first half. We got the sickness and disease. We got diseases right now like that Ebola that could spread like wildfire in just a matter of days. No one is safe. But we're up to now, I want you to see this, we have spent $32 million per hour on war since 2001. To read that again, we have spent $32 million per hour. Per hour, $32 million on war. Since 2001. Is things getting any better? No, they're getting worse. Look at Mattithyah 24. First off, look back to verse 3 and look at the last line of that verse and see the two words, the end. Now, he's speaking of the end in this chapter. That's his subject here, the end. Daniyl called it the end. In fact, he asked the two witnesses, what is the end going to be? And Daniyl showed him. and before that, he showed him the 7-year peace plan. The 7-year peace plan. it uses some words that you've got to spend some time on, but I figured it out for you, wrote it down for you. Yahweh showed it to me. I didn't figure it out. Yahweh shows me these things. And then, just like yesterday, I said, because of you. That don't make sense. Micahyah, because of you, Zion's going to be plowed like a field. Because of you. So I called David and I said, I've gone to extremes over this for years and haven't found anything. I said, but that word is not because. It means by you. By you. And that's what he's brought out this morning for you. By you. Not because of you, but by you. You're going to do this. You're going to plow Zion like a field. That's what you're going to do here to your own holy city. And they did. This was a Catholic church that bucked up against Samuel, came down to Micahyah, who said, you heads of Jacob, who love evil more than righteousness. Yeshua said, condemnation is coming to the world because you love evil more than righteousness. He said darkness, but that means the evil. Well, here now he says in chapter 24 of Mattithyah, talking about the end, verse 3, verse 7, for nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilence, that's disease epidemics, and bad earthquakes in place after place. Bad earthquakes. Then you see the great deception. He shows you this because of Revelations. He shows you more, and he shows you this great whore who's the leader of these religions. That's chapter 17 of Revelation. Here a little and there a little. And then in Revelations 18, he shows you how it's all going to end. The destruction that Daniyl spoke of in Daniel 9 and Daniel 12, until the destruction that is prophesied, he said. That destruction that is prophesied by Isaiah 24, Malachi 4, Malachi 4, 1 through 4. All of that is showing the end and the final result of this great whore. This great whore that sits on many waters. Now, I said I've got to speak today because today is the last day of May that I can speak. And of course, the Pope has turned all worship over to, May is a word for Mary, by the way, and that takes some maneuvering, but that's where it came from. The word church itself, it's a mystery too, but let me get this in your mind. The only thing they know is it comes from the word Circe, which I've showed you. Now, it's the word church stands for ecclesiastical authority of power. Well, who is this great whore that has all the authority? And where does the authority come from? Remember, Revelations 12, the great dragon gives her authority. The word Vatican itself means divining serpent. Why would anyone want to follow the divining serpent? Because the Catholic Church tells you to. And it's killed all the Yahwists clear down till now. And Yahweh allowed it. But he says, in the last days, I'm going to establish my house. But he didn't interfere with any of their murders. They tried to make out like that it was the Christians that were being slaughtered. It wasn't the Christians, it was the Christians that were slaughtering. The same thing you see in Acts with the Roman army. And then they plowed Zion like a field and moved to Rome, killing all who came there to the feast, which they thought was around 3 million. But even after that, in the countries, the word Circe, the female that went to the arenas and picked up what the lions and tigers didn't eat of the dead bodies, fed them to her pigs. Now, mythology says she turned her victims into swine. She's a goddess. And they paint this beautiful picture of a woman sitting there on a throne for you to look at after she washed the pig blood off her hand, following the priest who eats swine's flesh, Isaiah says. Well, the word church now, it's ecclesiastical authority or power. Now, the third word of this sentence I want you to get, because this tells it all right here. This is probably. The word church, well, it's probably. See, that's what mythology is. It's problematic, and it's probably this or that. So we don't want to tell you. If we did, it would be problematic to us, but it probably means this. It probably means this, and they give you a few things that it could mean. One of them is Lord's house. I believe that. Most people don't even know, and most of the preachers out there don't even know. But if you'd get you a Unger's Bible dictionary, I guess most any dictionary, Interpreters has it. But if you got your Unger's Bible dictionary and looked at it, it will tell you that the word Lord comes from dead rabbis. Dead rabbis. The rabbis existed in Israel. They moved to Rome. And out of honor for those dead rabbis, we don't say the Lord's name. We replace it with the title Lord, which is a title of dead rabbis. All you got to do is look up the word Lord. Is it that hard for you to study out there? I'm talking to all of you preachers. There's over 200,000 people listening to this program right now. And I know there's a lot of preachers. We're getting a lot of letters from you saying, we believe you, we've searched it out, we know you're not lying, we know this is the truth. Now, where do we go from here? That's the ones we're getting from the preachers. Lord's house, ruler Lord. Ruler Lord, it means to swell, to be swollen, hence strong and powerful. What does the word Roman mean? It means strong soldier. And they go to church. And then they give you some dates as to, well, it's probably used the first time in 1200. Another one, 16th century. Another one, 1570s, give or take. Another one in 1680. That would be your King James Version. Yeah, they made up these words. Etymology of the word God. You need to look that up too while you're looking. You need to really do some serious studying. It's what you need to do. But Circe, she's a goddess. Let me. The woman that I have pictured in my mind had blood all over her clothes, stunk to high heaven, and went in with her crew of people gathering up the dead bodies. I remember Jody Sparlin in Purcell. That's what I thought every time I saw him. He went out picking up dead bodies. These were horses and cows, brought them back and fed to Purcell in town and fed them to his pigs. Swine will eat anything. That's what they were made for. They were made to clean up the earth. They weren't made for Circe to turn the victims into swine and then eat the swine. Oh, what a delicacy. Well, the Pope, the reason I wanted to speak today, just a little bit, Pope Francis says Jesus, now he's hoping you will believe that this Jesus is the Savior. But no, this name Jesus was made up. If you'll look up the word, it was made up as a false, it was the names of two gods that evolved into these two words, Jesus and Christ, that they used in the King James Version. That there was no letter J, remember this, in the Hebrew alphabet, no letter J in the Greek alphabet, still not today, either one of them. There was no letter J in the English alphabet until 1600, when the King James Version was printed, published here in the United States, and sent out to all nations. Those are facts, and we got them in writing. Mother Church, this, he says, Pope Francis says Jesus is not our hope. Mary and the Mother Church are. The Mother Church. Where on earth did that start? Well, if you'll turn to Genesis 2nd and 3rd chapter, you'll find out it was put in the garden. Cain taught it. Yada 1:11 says, all the world has gone the way of Cain. Cain, the God worshiper. The word Catholic means God worshipers. It's universal. That's shown to you in Acts the 7th chapter. Universal. That even the host of heaven they worship. They established it, the 12 tribes established this in Israel, in Egypt. It went throughout the land of Egypt. God worship did. When they came out, they brought it with them. They rose up against Moshe, and the earth, in order to get Yahweh's message across, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up. And for fear of that quietened down the God worship until Moshe got the law written for us in these last days. Yes, us. Remember, the scripture was taken away after Yeshua was killed and after they killed the 11 of the 12 disciples that Fox's Book of Martyrs has record of. 11 of the 12 were murdered. Only one, we don't know his death. He's the one that copied Revelation. That was in 96. All of these scriptures was taken away from the people that they knew about, taken to Rome. When they plowed Zion like a field, Yada plowed Zion like a field. It was Yada. I'll prove that to you in Daniyl. He plowed Zion like a field, moved to Rome, and there he continued getting strong like Daniyl forecast he would, prophesied he would. Well, the 2nd and 3rd chapter of Genesis shows the start of it. That's your mother church. Your mother church, the worship of gods. And of course, they added the word lords later when the rabbis took over. They were the Catholics that moved in under the name rabbis, Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians. They came against Yeshua, murdered him. They came against the apostles and murdered them. These same ones, the Catholics, God worshipers. That's all shown in Acts. In Acts, mostly in the 7th chapter of Acts, where it shows that the tribes of Yada are the ones that did this. And it's never been taken away or interfered with till now. They're going to take it away from themselves like they did eternal life at the beginning. They're going to murder each other. This next war that they're getting prepared for, they're getting prepared for it right now. $32 million per hour. That's $32 million per hour being spent since 2001. Since 2001. All of it going into getting ready to wipe out mankind. We launched a bunch of new satellites, I think yesterday or day before. What are they for? They don't want to lose those satellites. Well, who else is launching satellites? Yeah, the enemy knows. Established in Egypt by the 12 tribes, elders of Egypt, Coptic Catholics. That's in 1 Samuel 8, 4 through 8. Yahweh said to Samuel, they have rejected me to worship their gods. That's what Catholic means, God worship. That's shown in Acts also. Mosiah 3. We better read that one. Mosiah. Mosiah 3, 1 and 2. Now hear the word which Yahweh has spoken against you, O children of Israel. O children of Israel, against the whole family which I brought from the land of Egypt. You believe it now? You only have I dealt with. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore, I will judge you for all your iniquities. Oh, that word iniquity. It means evil. That's the one thing, but it means a lot more than that. Can two walk together without they are being in agreement? Then 6, will a trumpet be blown in a city and the people not be afraid? Will iniquity, forster, be taking place in a city, and Yahweh not also have a righteous work there? Now he's asking the question, you see all of this evil. 4,199 religions, evil like the gods. There. He says, no. In the last days I will establish my house. That's what he said. These prophecies must be fulfilled. That's what Yeshua said. It's a must. If there was a prophecy that wasn't fulfilled, they'd be able to still put this up in court. Yeshua would have to face this in court. Yeshua don't have to face anything like that. He's the one that said these prophecies must be fulfilled. And he says, you're a fool if you think they're not going to be fulfilled. Luke 24, verse 25. Most assuredly, Father Yahweh will have no work other than the work that he has prophesied in advance by his servants, the prophets. That's the only work he's going to have. That's us. That's us. We got books in print to back it up. We got TV and radio shows, just like the mark of the beast. Read it. The gematria backs it up 100%. And that is Micah 3. Micah 3. We better turn there too, and we'll read that one. That will be our last scripture. Micah 3. Now this is the one that David set up till late last night and called me late last night and said, I found what you was hunting for. Well, Micahyah now. Micahyah 3, verses 1. Then I said, hear, O heads of Jacob. Who's he speaking to? the God worshippers that faced Samuel, said, we don't want to serve Yahweh, we want gods. And Yahweh said, let them have them. But in the last days I will establish my house, and it'll stop these wars. Then I said, hear now, O heads of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel. That's the ones that was in rulership when Yeshua came, about 400 years later, a little over. They were in rulership. They'd taken over the whole land with their great strong army, as Daniyl said they would. Wherever man lives on earth, they're going to be under your control, he said. That's what Daniyl said. Why do we have some trouble believing that? They're under Catholic control all over the world. You who hate righteousness. Did you get that? That's the truth. 100% truth. 4,199 religions, and they all hate righteousness. And Yeshua said, seek that first. Seek the kingdom of Yahweh and His righteousness. And they say, oh, we seek righteousness. Righteousness is Jesus. That's who we seek. That's our righteousness. Jesus. He's our Savior. And others who know Yeshua say, oh yeah, we seek Yeshua. He's our Savior. You'll only be blessed by the house of Yahweh, brother. Believe it. You better believe it. You'll not see Yeshua if you don't. You who hate righteousness and love evil. And love evil. Look down to, look at verse 9. Verse 9. Hear now, O heads of Jacob, O heads of the house of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all equity, who build up Zion with blood. Yes, this is going on in 750 BC by the Roman army. That's exactly when it shows that they came on the scene, killing, murdering the Yahwists, those who wanted to keep the Sabbath, those who owned the menorah, those who kept the feast days. When Titus surrounded Israel, Yeshua said they're going to surround it, they surround Jerusalem, then they're going to back off. Well, Titus got word that they were coming to keep the feast. Back off. So they took their army and left. They waited till the feast came, and they enclosed all of them. And they started their bloody murder. Then they plowed Zion. He says, her heads judge for reward, and her priests teach and for pay, and her prophets divine. That's what the word Vatican means. Divining serpent. You can Google that. You preachers, surely you got a computer. Surely you can Google the word Vatican. Surely you can check these scriptures out that I'm giving you here. For money. They're listening to this in Israel too, by the way. Yes, all over Israel. For money. Yet they lean upon Yahweh and say, is not Yahweh among us? No evil can come upon us. Therefore, because of you, that word because of you is actually what David brought out this morning. By you, by you, you're going to plow Zion like a field. Jerusalem will become heaps of rubble. The historians say when they came there later, they couldn't believe what they're seeing. It looked like a bare mountain that nobody had ever lived on. That's famous historians. That was before the Muslim mosque was invented. Well, turn with me to Daniyl. We need to do one more scripture here. Daniyl, the second chapter. Daniyl, the second chapter. And look at verse 37. Verse 37. Now, he just got through talking to Nebuchadnezzar and telling him this is what's going to be in the end. This is what's going to be in the end of your kingdoms that you're building. 4 kingdoms, the quartet. Verse 38, 238. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the fields, and the fowls of the air, that pretty well covers it all, doesn't it? Are you paying attention out there in TV land? That covers it all. He has given them into your hands. We just got through reading about them. The heads of Jacob. The rulers of Israel. Wherever a bird flies, wherever a man walks, it's going to be put in your hands. Under the Catholic Church. Under the Catholics with its strong authority. Revelations, a few verses, shows you where that authority of the Catholic Church comes from. He has given them into your hands and has made you ruler over them all. Ruler, Genesis 49:10 shows you the same thing. Yada, he's going to rule the earth. Genesis 49:10 tells you. Wherever the bird flies, wherever a man walks, he's going to be under the Catholic Church rulership in one way or another. How do you think the United States got power to sanction nations in and around the great river Euphrates? In and around the great river Euphrates. That's where you saw all the news there this morning. In and around the great river Euphrates. This is the first half. We're fixing to go into the second half. Get yourselves ready, brethren. Those who haven't come, you need to start making arrangements. Yahweh is not going to delay it. Yahweh's prophecies are going to come to pass, and they're going to come to pass on time. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you!